boys and girls, what is going on? It's your boy Peter here, aka Peter Freako 10, baby. Bring you guys an episode of the Movie Review Show, where the good movies are always reviewed. Okay, back into our movie review, and we're continuing Scream Fast. All right, I am pumped to do this one, boys and girls, because I don't know where to even start. This is a film that, seeing who was involved, I did not think that he was gonna create a film like this, make it this crazy, and create something that I'm sitting here speechless. I am literally sitting here speechless because of the lengths that he went to, and in an age where we were so inundated with the Scream-like slashers, this is something that felt the closest to, say, Seven and Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, which is why I wanted to check it out, but also because of who was involved. And boy, oh boy, is this something. Whether it's good or bad, you guys are going to hear my thoughts on that later. But what film is that, you may be asking? Today's film, boys and girls, is none other than Dee Snider's Strangeland, or Strangeland to be short. So, how does this film work, and how does Dee Snider do handling a horror film? Well, grab your piercings, grab your heavy metal CDs, grab your chains and hooks and cages, and let us talk about Strangeland. Now, Strangeland, this is a film made in 1998, and this is directed by John Pieplow. Now, John Pieplow, this is mostly a commercial and theater director. This isn't a huge name in the film industry. The only movie he really directed before this was a really shitty TV movie called Jurassic Woman, which I haven't seen, but the IMDb rating does speak for itself. But like Child's Play, he's not the brainchild this stems from. That belongs to none other than the star and the writer himself, Dee Snider. Now, for those not familiar with 80s rock, let me give you a bit of history. Dee Snider was the front man on the band Twisted Sister, who made a huge mark on the rock and roll category with hit songs like I Wanna Rock and, of course, We're Not Gonna Take It. So you may be asking, why would Dee Snider want to take part in the horror genre when he's making good money being a big part of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Well, like Child's Play, it was a long road, but every story has a beginning, and that's where ours starts. You see, it all started with the birth of his son, Jesse Snider, and like every father, your view of the world changes as you want your son to be with the right people, be in the right hands, and be protected. Around this time, he had come across a story of a man who had lured kids to his house and mutilated them and got off on an insanity plea. This disgusted Dee so much, looking at the situation from the point of view of a father and picturing his son in that situation, saying, if that was my kid, I would have had him killed. He was so angered by this, he channeled his anger into the music he wrote. Two songs in particular symbolized his anger towards this particular situation. In particular, Extreme Justice and Captain Howdy, the inspiration for the character in this movie, also being a nod to The Exorcist. It's the early 90s now, and Dee has become unpleased with the horror films that the 90s was churning out, a la Leprechaun, Rumpelstiltskin, Chucky, and Scream. But he wanted to do something that was scary and took no chances. Thus why he began writing a script for a horror movie, which he originally titled Helltown, and went for more of a slasher route. Despite shopping the project around and so many distributors telling Dee how much they loved this film, the only one being truthful was special effect whiz Tom Savini, who told Dee, and I quote, "Dude, it's shit." He wanted Dee to get away from the stalk and slash stuff and be really smart with the horror and not be cliched. Around this time, he became aware of AOL chat rooms and instant messaging, but also became aware of the dangers associated with them and started to base the story around that, as well as the goth craze that had started up around the time and how people were into that, as well as modern primitivism. And he decided to write a horror film combined around those two, which eventually transformed into Strangeland. Once the script was finished, he showed it to Tom, who a couple days later left him a voicemail saying, hey Dee, I read your script, man. Really creepy, man. He knew he had succeeded, and this was the project that he was gonna make. He shopped the project around with the intention of having more involvement with the film. His agent tried to talk him out of that, though, as he knew that this would be a death sentence, as that would mean nobody would buy it. He eventually came across a company known as the Shooting Gallery who got wind of it, and they liked the film because it wasn't another slasher leaning more towards Seven than Friday the 13th. Around this time they were finalizing the deal, John Pieplow had got word of the movie and jumped at the chance, convincing them that he was the right guy for the job, and took a look at the story and helped Dee with certain aspects of the story. They liked what Dee and John brought to the movie and greenlit the movie with a budget of $1 million, and they got their cast together. Before the movie began shooting, Dee actually started doing research into the world of internet crimes and modern primitivism and body art and modification. He also stepped up his training, despite being a really thin guy, as he wanted the character to be more muscular to give him a more imposing presence, also drawing influence from Nazi war criminals. The movie was shot on location in Colorado, as Dee felt there were certain buildings in that area that had a certain gothic atmosphere he wanted to have in the movie. Dee had a lot of input when making it too, incorporating the research he learned on neo-tribalism, and even the soundtrack, which his son played a part, picking which bands he wanted to include. Taking on the torture mantle and showing the effect of a hook entering the skin would go to Michael Burnett and his group MBPFX. Michael is no stranger to the horror genre, having worked on the effects for Dolly Dearest. He was a special effects assistant on the Blob remake, Unknown Origin, or Alien Within, not to be confused with the Peter Weller of Unknown Origin. And while not horror, he did help on Universal Soldier. Michael and Dee had already had a history of working together, being Michael had done the makeup effects for one of the Twisted Sister music videos. Michael turned to using gelatin to get the illusion of a hook entering the flesh, and Dee found himself spending 10 hours in a makeup chair to get him transformed into Captain Howdy. Despite a good amount of piercings that were fake, the only one that had to be pierced was his septum, as well as a foam rubber one that was also used. They wanted the movie to be disturbing, but not overly graphic, like a Friday the 13th sort of slasher and heavily reliant on blood and guts. Dee also had a cast dummy made of himself for the final. Shooting lasted for a specific amount of time, then they submitted it to the MPAA, which came back with an X. Strangeland would be a first for the MPAA, though, as it was the first to be rated based on the torture aspect of the story, something of which the MPAA never had to rate on before. This made Dee happy at first until they reminded him that it would ruin the film, being that it would be hard to get it into a good chunk of theaters, which meant they had to cut the film to get an R rating, which it eventually did. Dee also marketed the film himself, going to horror cons cosplaying as Captain Howdy, and even toured singing songs as the character in various areas. It was still given a limited release, though, being released in only 315 theaters and made only over $713,000. On top of that, the movie received negative reviews from critics, being that on Rotten Tomatoes, it carries a 6%. I am not joking you, a 6%. Critics ripped apart for its lifeless direction, poor makeup effects, and some of the goth community felt the film was giving them a bad name. There were some good reviews, though. In particular, Tony Timpone of Fangoria actually liked the film and said that Dee Snider's created a horror icon for the next generation. In fact, even Dee himself has said the audience mattered more to him than the actual critics. And I think he'd be right, as on Rotten Tomatoes' audience side is a 64%, and on IMDb is a 5.1 out of 10. So I think it varies between platforms. But the film did well enough for Dee that he's planning on getting a sequel going. But before we get into seeing this turned into a franchise, how did he do with the first outing? I have a couple things to say. Number one, the most obvious thing is, I love this movie. But along with that, I have to say, my God. Because despite loving this film, I can't say I have fun with this movie, because it's probably, to me, and I'm going to say this, and I hate to admit it, it's probably one of the most disturbing movies I've ever seen. And it surprised me how disturbing it was, being that Dee Snider was involved. And I thought he would want to tame it down. But no, he didn't. That's what drew me to this movie, though, because I was and still am a huge fan of Twisted Sister. Regardless of how you feel about Dee or his politics, those are areas I don't like getting into. The guy's a legend in the rock industry. He made a huge impact on rock and metal music. And when I heard he was doing a horror movie, I became really interested. So I took a night out to see it. And my God, this movie is a ride. And I'm going to say this is probably the first time that I ever felt myself flinching during a movie. And that is saying something considering the movies I've seen. This movie is not for the faint of heart, if that doesn't say anything. When it grabs you, it never lets go. And considering the areas it touches, it succeeds at being serious, scary, and just all around makes you leave in disgust and you want to go home and take a shower. That's how I really see it. I'll get into those later. But with the cast in this film, you got Kevin Gage, who was Waingro in Heat. He also had a small role in the opening of Con Air. He's the guy Nicolas Cage kills that gets him sent to jail. You have Elizabeth Pena in this from Jacob's Ladder. She was also in Rush Hour. She's the bomb squad chick that Chris Tucker tries to get in her pants. Brett Harrelson, Woody Harrelson's brother. He was also in The People vs. Larry Flint. Linda Cardellini, she was in Good Burger. She was also in Dead Man on Campus. She's the girl that Jason Segel gets with. I'll review that after Halloween. Other people, you got Amy Smart, who's going to be in Varsity Blues. Robert Englund, Yvonne Coyle, who was in Godfather Part 2. And you even have a small role from Robert Lazardo, who was Smitty in Waterworld. But of course, the cast cannot be rounded out without talking about Dee Snider, who was the lead singer of Twisted Sister, and he also had a small role in Private Parts. Now, the plot of Strangeland is, it's basically about this man named Captain Howdy, who is this steroid-abusing sociopathic freak who is all tattooed and pierced up, and basically he's deeply involved himself in the world of goth and modern primitivism, and he's become so involved with that group that he somehow believes that he is the rite of passage in some shape or form, looking at the pain other people experiencing from, say, piercing themselves or planting hooks into themselves as pleasure. And what he does is he basically uses these AOL chat rooms to lure people to his house with the promise of having a party, when he basically drugs them and kidnaps them and locks them in these cages and puts them in these contraptions so he can perform these weird ritualistic modern primitivism art on them, as he feels making people experience the same pleasure he's feeling when he does this to himself will get them into the rite of passage. Well, one night he ends up luring this girl named Genevieve, played by Linda Cardellini, to his house with the promise of having a party along with her friend, which catches the attention of her father, Mike, played by Kevin Gage, and her mother, played by Elizabeth Pena, who, her father being a cop, decides to investigate what is going on and begins to deeply involve himself into the world of goth, body art, and even the internet itself, which leads him straight to Howdy's basement or dungeon, because it's basically a sex dungeon, where he ends up arresting him and saving his daughter. Then the film jumps forward to the present day, and we see that Howdy has gotten off on an insanity plea and was sentenced to an asylum where he's now reformed and he's on medication. So now that they see some change in him, they release him back into the public. However, the locals don't take too kindly to that, as the local redneck, Jackson Roth, played by Robert Englund, jumping to conclusions thinking his daughter has been kidnapped by Carlton Hendricks, when really she's at some hotel fucking a guy, decides to organize a posse and lynch mob him. And in the fight, his medication gets destroyed and he's left for dead, but he reawakens as Captain Howdy. And he's basically now set on revenge. So now Mike needs to basically go and finish the job he finished a long time ago and protect his daughter. Will Mike be able to end Howdy's wrath? Or will he be the next piece of art in Howdy's basement? Strangeland is a film unlike any other. This is not a horror film that is for the faint of heart. This is a film that is one part serial killer thriller in the vein of Silence of the Lambs and Seven, one part Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, a little bit of Maniac with some goth salt in it. That's the best way I can say it. But I do feel that this movie is a lot smarter than I think critics overlooked in their rants about it. Because the setup for the film I thought was ingenious. Because the internet idea, I loved it. And how he uses the internet to his advantage, I think was a perfect starting point. Because I love how it plays up a fear that I think a lot of people, including myself, have of meeting people online and talking to them online. And despite talking to them for so long, you're willing to send something to them that you wouldn't send to somebody else or go and meet them. And you think, oh, we've been talking for so long, they're probably not that bad, I'll go and meet them. But it's a trap. I love that idea because it plays on a fear that a lot of people have of meeting people online in a chat room, not knowing who's on the other side, and them not being truthful. I think that was a smart idea. And especially in this world now where we're seeing cyber crimes and sexting and all that and having these weird things going on online, I think it was a smart place to start. The other place I feel this film works is with the character of Captain Howdy, who I thought was an ingenious setup for a horror villain. Being this guy who has involved himself so deeply into the goth culture and just piercing himself that he doesn't care who does or doesn't like the fear of piercings in their body and is willing to kidnap them just to make them experience it. And just keep them as slaves in his dungeon too. That is messed up. And just how the film goes out of its way just to show how psycho this guy is and how out of touch with reality he is. Like you see him setting up in his room with the computer that he uses and he's cutting himself or sinking hooks into him. All the while the people are in the back yelling for help and screaming. And there are some points in the movie when you see even the goth community is scared of him. And I think that adds to the movie's message about how there's an extreme in everything, including later on when he's deformed and he's back at his house eating dinner, fulfilling the promise of changing and taking his medication, and the community isn't still willing to give him a chance, and how they automatically resort to mob mentality, kind of putting home that both sides are nuts and both sides have no limits. Yes, what he did is horrible, but the community is not any better for going the way they did, which I think is more relevant in today's world, being the hot topics that we have going on about how there's an extreme on both sides. And I think that's a message that I think a lot of people need to hear today. So how it delivers the horror is ingenious. I don't agree with the goth community feeling like it portrays them in a bad light when the point of the film is that there is one person who is extreme on both sides. And I think the character of Captain Howdy is very interesting. You can tell Dee had a lot of thought put into it. This wasn't just just make him a scary villain. No, there was a lot of deeper and complex thoughts that he came up with when writing it. And we'll get to his performance later. That being said, some aspects of the script could be a bit better, because there's some moments when character development, in particular, Mike and his daughter Genevieve, there's no sense of chemistry between the two. You don't really feel there's a sense of a father-daughter sort of relationship, which I don't think is the fault of Dee and his writing, because there's a trailer out there of this movie that has scenes that aren't in the final movie. So I don't know if there was more in there and they cut it out. But there's areas where I feel like the character development is very limited. You don't get a sense of how connected Mike is with his daughter, and I feel that's an area that could have been explored better, despite the scenes later on when you do show him sitting in the car and you can tell he's upset, and those areas are handled well. It's just there's other areas where you don't get a sense of a bond with the two. Like, why would this guy care so much, especially when we don't have scenes kind of pushing that forward, that the two have a great relationship. Being her father's not enough. You have to have those scenes. With that, though, I do appreciate with this character of them making the lead a cop. That's something you don't see in these types of horror films, and they picked an everyday guy. I like that he's not a Brad Pitt or a Val Kilmer, but an actor who looks like somebody you would see every day as a cop. I thought it was a nice change of pace. Besides that problem, I think the film deserves more credit for where it goes with the story than I think people are willing to admit. And it can be scary, too. It definitely pulls no punches in the story department, especially on the themes that it touches upon, especially in the torture area, which I will talk about later. Now, I've heard some people complain about the technical side of this movie, and I think that's a bit unfair. This movie was made for over $1 million, and for a low-budget movie, I think it's a good-looking movie. The fact that it even got into theaters with just $1 million is insane. I think the directing by John Pieplow is very well done. I have seen a clip of his work in Jurassic Woman. I think this looks much better than that. And I think Dee picked the right guy because his directing goes great with the feel that Dee wanted for this movie. How it opens, too. I really like the opening with how it has the Rakius releasing, Rakukius, or whatever the name of the company that they got for the film is, and then it just pops up Dee Snider Strangeland, and you kind of see it squiggling out, and then the credits roll, and the camera's basically zooming over stuff that is important to Captain Howdy, like the syringes, someone's driver's license, that could be one of the victims he kidnapped. All the while you have In Conclusion by Dee Snider himself. Sets up the film nice. I've died 1,000 times, drowned in a sea of lies, walked every path through every door. Oh, how I suffered through the wicked that can do, but they can't ignore the things I have in store. That was awesome. I'll get into the soundtrack later. And his use of the camera in particular scenes, I like how he films Dee in a way where you don't see his face till later on in the movie. The only thing you see is like close-up shots of him, his boots, or his chapped teeth, which I like how they made the teeth look in this film. There's shots of him doing pull-ups or using his computer, and you see his fingers dancing on the keys. I thought it really gave Howdy a great build-up to his first reveal. And I like how when he's revealed and Gage is on the ground like this and the camera goes up, kind of making him look larger than he actually is. So it's not just what everybody makes it out to be with the directing. It's not just put the camera here, get a shot, put the camera there. You can tell John was really giving a lot of passion to the directing. And if it wasn't passionate enough for other people, I can forgive it because of the limitations of the budget. And I honestly think it's well directed for what he had to do. Because the attention is there, and I think the sets themselves that he films in are very creepy. I like the look of the basement that Howdy has with all these people he's kidnapped and tied up. I like the look of the contraption. And at one point, Genevieve is Linda Cardellini's character. She literally has a tube shoved into her, so that's how she goes into the bathroom. That's the only place that she can pee. It's not excessively gross. You don't see it in her. It's just, you kind of get the idea of a tube in her cage and there's water coming out. It's enough, but you get the point. It's enough to be disturbing, and it's enough for it to be not as grotesque as, say, Cannibal Holocaust. And I think they get great use out of the locations to shoot in, to show the world that he's a part of and show how weird that culture is, especially in the Sabalba scene, the entrance to hell with Bile singing on stage, pretty girl with the knife. And I think that goes well with the film. I think it really does a great job setting up the world that he's a part of and how his mind is so enfried with it. The only thing I will say about it is the editing at times can be a bit chintzy in some areas. There's some cool moments, like in particular when you see him at the club and the camera zooms in through this little window, and as it's getting closer, you see this candle shot transitioning the scene as it gets closer to him. But there's moments where it's weirdly edited. Like there's one scene where it goes black for a second and back to show a transition. There's a scene where the film freezes and he smacks somebody to make it look like he's whacking him. You can tell that this was a rushed editing process to get the film out. But there's some good moments in it, but there's other points when it looks very clunky. And I hope if they ever do a sequel, the editing is better. I will say, though, when it comes to moments involving the torture, those are shot well. There's some very gut-flinching scenes of him torturing people, the shots of which, with some close-up shots of him entering the hook into people or pretty much piercing them. It's very, very uncomfortable to watch. It's not excessively gory, but it's definitely shot disturbingly and more in the way of a low-budget Seven. That's the best way I can describe it. And the aftermath portions are very disturbing, especially with how they're shot. Especially when you get up close to the victim's face and you see they're in this sort of daze. It's disturbing to watch. So overall, I disagree on this being a passionless movie. I think it has more to do with the movie's budget, because there is a lot of heart that went into the making of this film. Along with that, the acting, which for a low-budget flick, I gotta say, this is a stacked cast, and I think they do great. Kevin Gage, I thought, did great as the lead, despite not having as much character development with his daughter or feeling like there was any chemistry. You still feel for the guy, because anybody, regardless if you're a parent or not, can understand what this guy is going through. I like the fact that he's trying to take matters into his own hand. He's trying to figure out how to work the computer, and you see him plugging it in and out, showing how computer illiterate he is, and just the fact that he's willing to step into the bowels of the goth community to save his daughter. It made it easier for me to like him. I know a friend of mine said he doesn't show as much emotion. I just think he's not trying to show that so people don't see him as a wreck, and some may use it against him. And I think he does a great job getting into the action portions, particularly the fight at the end. If there was a stunt double playing him, they did a great job hiding it. But the moments I can tell it's Kevin, I thought he did a good job. I like the ending quote he gives when he's fighting Audi and he's about to kill him. "What's the matter, Carlton? You afraid? You told me you've never been afraid of anything in your whole life. That you wish you were dead. Ain't that how it was?" But yeah, Kevin, I thought, did great as the lead. And like I said, I like the fact that he's not Brad Pitt looking or Val Kilmer. And I hope they ever do a sequel, he comes back, because I'd like to see his story continue. Brett Harrelson, who, although despite not being his brother in the acting department, he does a good job. I like that he's sort of the tough guy of the two, wanting to take more drastic action in the situation, is willing to go to drastic measures, like when he's talking to the computer guy on the phone and he goes, "You better have some useful information or I'll come down there and arrest your megabyte ass." That had me dying. But him and Kevin do great together. They have some great moments, and he does well for what he's given. Elizabeth Pena does well too. She's not in the film a whole lot. That's probably another place the editing got to. But for what she's given, she does well playing the wife. Amy Smart does well. Nice to see her. I like that she's not a victim to Captain Howdy, but rather a smart character who helps them figure out the chat rooms. I like how she's explaining how she changed her name to Hellraising V-Girl and how people can easily change their names, and talking about how the internet works. But I like her. I thought she did good. Linda Cardellini, I thought she was great. You really feel for her and what she goes through in this movie. I like how the film later on shows how she's trying to move on from the goth crowd and trying to clean herself up, but she's not well, including that dream scene where she imagines herself being chased by Howdy. She does well. Robert Englund is also great, playing the ultimate right-wing redneck, as Dee put it, especially in the accent. He does well for what he's given. I do find it funny in the scene when he gets to the house and he's like, "Where is she? What have you done with my daughter?" And spends more time beating on Howdy than he does looking for his daughter. I'm like, are you here to fucking find your daughter, or are you here to beat him? But I think that kind of ties into the hypocritical nature. Maybe he knew that his daughter was there and was just looking for an excuse so he could kill him. I will say, though, I did not need to see him in his underwear getting ready to pop a boner so he can screw his wife. That was just like, what the fuck, man? It was weird, disturbing, and just that whole scene, which I'll get to when I talk about cons, him going, "Come to daddy," bam, 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 turning me on. I'm like, oh my God, what the fuck, man? But the acting is solid from everybody. But I can't finish up this portion without talking about the standout of the acting category. Dee Snider as Captain Howdy. Because, oh my God, Dee was amazing as Howdy and definitely showcases his range as an actor. You can tell this was a passion role for Dee, as just how he manages to give Howdy this warped perception of reality that he has somehow created, as he believes he's bringing pleasure to these people, and just how he shows how out of touch he is, sitting in that room with the candles lit around him and him looking up at the ceiling around all these needles. It just shows how out of touch he is. And just this, in that scene when he's going on about the rites of passage, and he's like pulling no punches about how it must be physical, it must be painful, and it must leave a mark. Dee pulled no punches when playing this character. He was like, fuck it, I'm gonna make it disturbing. If you don't like it, too bad. And just how into it he is, how he put a lot into this character, and just how he wanted this to be the next big horror icon. I really, really appreciate him for that. He has my full respect thanks to this movie, and I really hope he does more with this character in the future. But of course, speaking of Captain Howdy, a man is only as good as his torturing, and that's where the special effects come in. Let me start off by saying this film is nonstop torture, and we'll get to that in a bit. But I also don't get where people are saying that the effects suck. I don't know what movie they saw. For over $1 million, this is some damn good effects. The makeup effects on Dee by Michael Burnett look great. I like the sort of tribal warrior sort of look that they gave him with the tattoos, which looked really real when looking at them, but turns out they were fake, especially the piercings under his neck. I thought those were real, but turns out it was fake. Love that it's a kind of metaphor for someone deep into the goth culture, and the modern primitivism movement has done body art on himself, especially the clogged like veins that they put on him right there. It really gives you a feeling of someone that you wouldn't want to be alone with in an alley. But of course, like I said, the torture. And those look great. They're not completely graphic, as I said. I want to make that perfectly clear. Despite this being a torture movie, it's not incredibly graphic, but it is disturbing, and you will get a sense of yourself flinching. Like when Robert Englund is captured and you see Howdy has sewed his eyes and his mouth shut, and you see him grabbing the hook, and you see him putting the hook in his skin. They get up close with that. They're pulling no punches. The hook's entering him, and you're gonna see it. And I couldn't look. I had to flinch at that. And later you see this really, really just, aftermath of him hanging off the hooks like this off the ground, because he puts so much into him. It's a really grotesque looking effect with the skin up like this. And that was just insane. There's another scene where he has this guy and he pierces his genitals. There's one when he takes this one woman, he starts putting these spikes into her body. And they get up close with that too. You will see the spear entering her body. So there's a lot that went into the effects in this movie. And the makeup effects look so good, I can't fault myself for flinching. And in these moments, you have a fantastic soundtrack that I've already touched upon a couple of them, but there's a few other ones that any hardcore metal fan will get a kick out of. You got songs from Bile, Kid Rock, Megadeth, Nashville Pussy, Seven Dust, Marilyn Manson, even Twisted Sister reunites, which really fit each scene that the film is going for. But I'm going to say it right now, this is probably the most disturbing film I've seen in a long time. And I think the film really shows Dee's talents as a writer and a horror icon that I think will draw a lot of people in for the future. It's got its flaws. I've touched upon a couple, but if I had to touch another one, I'm going back to that scene with Robert in his underwear, because in that scene, you see that Howdy has killed his wife. And I get what they're doing. They're trying to make it seem like he's his puppet as he's making her dance, but I don't know. I don't know if it's how it's shot or the idea behind it or the music they chose. Something about it just didn't mesh well with the rest of the tone in the film that it was going for, especially with the music that was used. It literally looked like something out of Weekend at Bernie's. And that scene could have been cut, because after that, the tone goes back to being serious. And I'm just like, what was the point of this in the movie? And why did it look so goofy? But you didn't need that scene. It could have been done anyway. Like, you could have had him killing the wife and then and him walking into the kitchen to find her dead, or pierced up on this thing and her saying, "Help me," and knocked out. You didn't need to do the dancing puppet thing or whatever it was, the Weekend at Bernie's Strangeland edition, whatever the fuck you call it. Those are really my only problems, though. But bottom line, Strangeland is a pierce-stabbing good time that shows Dee's love for the horror industry in a film that will stick with you after it's been turned off. If you like these sort of films and are in the goth crowd, I highly recommend you go see Strangeland. Don't listen to the bad reviews. Take yourself to see it and you'll have a blast. I really hope we get a sequel in the future. But check this movie out for Halloween. It's a ride. So when it comes down to it, I give Dee Snider Strangeland a 9.2 out of 10. And it deserves it. Therefore gets the Alexandra seal of approval. Definitely a great ride. Great ride for the goth and a great ride for anybody who loves horror. But yeah, that is my review for Strangeland, and next time I am going to do a review on Bride of Chucky, and then I got Carrie and John Carpenter's Vampires for Halloween, and that's going to be it for Screep Fest, and then I am going to go back to, well, after Halloween, I'll do John Carpenter's Vampires, but after that, going to go back to the other movies I plan to review, Disturbing Behavior. I was going to review that for Halloween, but someone else reviewed it, and I don't want to get in their way and take their credit. So we're not going to do that. We're going to save it for another time. But I also plan to review Rush Hour. Ants is one I plan to see, and Clay Pigeons is also one I want to check out. Those reviews are coming next month, so be on the lookout for those. But for right now, I will see you guys later. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of Strangeland. Were you one of the few people who saw it? Do you guys enjoy it? I'd love to know you guys' thoughts. Be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.